All right, welcome everyone to this modern medical science explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're embarking on a full, outside-in 3D digital dissection of the human heart. Think of this as your virtual surgical flight plan. We're going to peel back the layers, truly understand its brilliant topography, and map the vital highways of this absolutely incredible organ.
But hey, before we make our first virtual incision, I want you to ask yourself, where exactly is your heart right now? We've all seen that classic perfectly symmetrical Valentine symbol, but the spatial reality inside your chest cavity is vastly different and honestly far more fascinating. It's not sitting perfectly upright, and it certainly isn't symmetrical. So let's anchor the real anatomy right into your own chest.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. Number 1, unboxing the human heart. Number 2, orientation, apex and base. Number 3, mapping surfaces and borders. Number 4, navigating the heart's grooves. And number 5, clinical anatomy in action. Section 1, unboxing the human heart, the protective layers. Okay, let's dive into this. To get to the organ itself, we first have to examine the heavy fortification surrounding it in the middle mediastinum, which is just the central compartment of your chest. Now, it might actually surprise you to learn that the average adult male heart weighs merely 300 grams. For females, it's about 250 grams. So it's relatively small, yet it carries this massive, non-stop physiological responsibility for your entire life. To do that without literally tearing itself apart, it needs a very special kind of armor. And that armor is called the pericardium. It's a fibroserous sac that entirely encloses the heart and the roots of the great vessels, like your aorta. But it's not just a simple bag. It's a dynamic shock absorber. It acts as a mechanical barrier against infection from the surrounding lungs. It restricts excessive movement, so your heart doesn't just bounce around in your chest. And it physically prevents the heart from overexpanding if your blood volume suddenly spikes. Now, if we look closer, the inner serous pericardium actually has 2 layers. You've got the parietal layer on the outside, and the visceral layer, also known as the epicardium, which is fused directly to the heart muscle itself. Notice the stark difference in pain sensitivity here, because this is crucial. Only the outer parietal layer feels pain since it's supplied by somatic nerves. The epicardium, innervated by autonomic nerves, is completely insensitive to pain. This beautifully explains why the sharp, stabbing pain of pericarditis, which is inflammation of that sac, feels so distinctly different from the deep, crushing pain of cardiac muscle ischemia. Moving to Section 2, orientation, apex, and base. Establishing the spatial posture. Now that we've breached the outer defenses, we need to establish the heart's exact 3D spatial geometry, because remember, it does not sit straight up and down. To get our bearings, we look at 2 major anatomical landmarks, the apex and the base. Let's start with the apex. It is formed entirely by the thick, muscular left ventricle, and it acts almost like a blunt pointer, directed downwards, forwards, and over to the left. Try this right now. Place your hand on your left side, exactly at the 5th rib space, just slightly inward from the middle of your collarbone. Feel that? That is the apex of your heart, physically tapping against your chest wall. So if the apex points down and forward, you'd naturally think the base is at the bottom, right? Actually, scratch that. The base isn't at the bottom like a pyramid at all. It is the heart's posterior surface. Formed mainly by the left atrium, it faces strictly backwards, resting right in front of your thoracic vertebrae, T5 through T8. It acts as this firm, stable anchor point at the back, where all the major pulmonary veins enter the heart. Section 3. Mapping surfaces and borders. A 3D topographical map. By defining these specific borders, physicians can literally draw the outline of the heart right on a patient's chest. Construct this mental square with me. It's pretty neat. The right border is a nearly vertical drop between the 2 great veins, the superior and inferior vena cava. The inferior border runs almost horizontally along your diaphragm, sweeping from that inferior vena cava all the way over to the apex. The left border swoops up from the apex to the left auricle. And finally, the upper border, which is hidden slightly by the great vessels, is formed by the 2 atria. Now, within those borders, we find 4 distinct surfaces. The anterior, or sternocostal surface, sits right behind your breastbone. And surprisingly, this outward-facing surface is mostly made up of the right side of the heart, the right atrium and right ventricle. The inferior, or diaphragmatic surface, rests completely flat on the central tendon of your diaphragm. And, as you'd guess, the left and right surfaces simply form the sides. What's wild is that this surface mapping perfectly reflects the heart's internal workload. Think about it. The right ventricle forms most of the front of the heart because it pumps blood just next door, right to the lungs for pulmonary circulation. But the left ventricle, which forms the apex and most of the left surface, has to pump blood all the way to the top of your head and down to your toes. Because of this massive systemic workload, the left ventricular wall is physically 3 times thicker than the right. Let's move to section 4, navigating the heart's grooves, the vital vascular highways. Okay, so knowing the chambers is great, but how does this tirelessly working muscle actually feed itself? We're going to turn our attention to the surface sulci. These are sunken grooves on the outside of the heart that act as vital vascular highways. Because here's a crazy paradox for you. The heart muscle cannot extract oxygen from the blood inside its own chambers. No way. It needs a dedicated external supply. These 3 external grooves basically separate the chambers from one another, but more importantly, they safely house the coronary arteries and veins. You have the circular atrioventricular sulcus separating top from bottom, while the anterior and posterior grooves separate left from right. Imagine tracing these high-tech spatial pathways on the back of the heart. The groove between the atria comes down, the coronary groove runs across, and the posterior groove goes down between the ventricles. Eventually, they all intersect at a single, critical junction right on the back of the heart. In anatomy, this major intersection is known as the crux of the heart. It's an absolutely vital landmark for locating the specific vessels that supply the heart's built-in electrical pacemaker system. And finally, section 5, clinical anatomy in action. Why this spatial mapping matters. Let's bring all this anatomical data back into the real world. Why does this dry topography matter to a doctor or a patient? Because knowing the perfect healthy blueprint is the only way to recognize when something is critically wrong. But here's where it gets wild. What if I told you the entire precise map we just built can sometimes be completely flipped? In a condition called dextrocardia, the heart develops as a perfect mirror image. The apex actually points to the right. This can sometimes be part of a larger condition called situs inversus, where literally all thoracic and abdominal organs are mirrored. For the vast majority of us with normal anatomy, though, the apex provides a direct physical window into our cardiac health. Physicians don't just listen to the heart with a stethoscope, they actively look for and feel the apex beat. By placing a hand directly over that 5th intercostal space we mapped out earlier, exactly 9 centimeters from the midline, a doctor can physically assess the pumping power and the size of the left ventricle. And hey, remember that pericardial sac from our unboxing section? Normally, the pericardial cavity contains just 15 to 20 milliliters of serous fluid, just enough for lubrication. But in a condition called pericardial effusion, pathological fluid builds up. Because that fibrous outer sac is incredibly tough, it doesn't stretch easily, so the excess fluid physically chokes the heart, restricting its ability to beat, and creates this massive, highly distinct water bottle silhouette on a patient's chest x-ray. It's a striking visual of anatomy gone wrong. Well, there you have it. We've explored the armor, the geometry, the borders, and the vital highways that make up the external geography of the human heart. Next time you feel your pulse bounding in your wrist, take a second to visualize that intricate 300-gram marvel twisting and pumping away right beneath your sternum. It really begs the question, what other hidden anatomical highways are silently keeping you alive right now? Stay curious, keep exploring your own anatomy, and thank you for joining me on this explainer.